At Sunday lunch, my daughter-in-law yelled at me. "This old woman is just a burden. Just throw her in a nursing home already." Even my son laughed. On Monday, their home loan was canceled. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The words hit me like a slap across the face, sharp and unexpected in the quiet of my own dining room. This old woman is nothing but expenses. Just throw her in a nursing home already. Everly's voice cut through the Sunday afternoon air, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at me as if I were some unwanted piece of furniture. I was standing by the kitchen counter, carefully arranging the apple pie I had baked that morning, when my daughter-in-law's shrill voice stopped me cold. My hands trembled slightly as I set down the serving knife, the metal clattering against the ceramic plate. For a moment I thought I had misheard her. Surely my son's wife hadn't just suggested throwing me away like garbage in my own home. But then I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. David, my only child, the boy I had raised alone after his father died when he was just 12 years old, started laughing. Not an uncomfortable laugh. Not the nervous chuckle of someone caught off guard by their spouse's cruelty. He was genuinely amused. "She's right, Mom," David said between chuckles, his voice carrying that casual tone he used when discussing weekend plans or grocery lists. "You're getting older, and it's becoming harder to take care of you. Maybe it's time to start looking at some nice facilities." I gripped the edge of the granite countertop, my knuckles turning white. The same countertop I had paid for when they renovated this kitchen 2 years ago. The same kitchen in the house whose mortgage I had been covering for the past 5 years, ever since David lost his job at the engineering firm, and somehow never managed to find another one that paid as well. They thought the money came from my late husband's inheritance. They had no idea that I had been quietly selling my jewelry, dipping into my savings, even taking on part-time bookkeeping work for local businesses to keep their lifestyle afloat. Every month, I transferred $3,000 into David's account, telling him it was investment dividends from his father's portfolio. Every month, I watched my own nest egg shrink while their standard of living remained untouched. The dining room could be turned into a home office, Everly continued, her eyes scanning my dining room with the calculating gaze of someone already redecorating. And we could finally get that hot tub for the back deck without worrying about disturbing anyone. I turned slowly to face them, my heart pounding so hard I was certain they could hear it. David was leaning back in his chair, the same chair where he used to sit as a child, eating the cookies I baked for him after school. Everly sat beside him, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer sweater the same one I had unknowingly paid for with my October contribution to their household. "David," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you really feel that way?" For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Maybe guilt, maybe the memory of all those nights I had stayed up with him when he had nightmares after his father died. But it passed quickly, replaced by that sheepish expression he wore whenever Everly was unhappy with him. "It's not personal, Mom. It's just practical. You're 70 years old and Everly and I are trying to start our lives together. We need space, and honestly the financial burden is getting pretty heavy." Financial burden. The words echoed in my mind as I stared at my son. This man I had sacrificed everything for. The same son who drove a BMW I was paying for, lived in a house I was financing, and wore clothes purchased with money I earned by working 4 days a week at 70 years old. "I see," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside my chest. Everly smiled then, a sweet, satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. "Don't look so dramatic, Margaret. We're talking about nice places, the kind with activities and people your age. You'd probably be happier there anyway, instead of rattling around this big house all alone." Alone. As if I chose to spend my evenings by myself while they went out to expensive restaurants and weekend getaways, funded by my dwindling bank account. I excused myself and walked slowly to my bedroom, closing the door behind me with the gentleness of someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. But inside I was screaming. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I had shared with my husband for 28 years before cancer took him, and I let the tears fall silently. They wanted to throw me away. My own son, the boy I had carried for 9 months, raised through colic and teenage rebellion and heartbreak, wanted to discard me like an old appliance that no longer worked properly. And the woman he had chosen to love was leading the charge, eager to erase me from their perfect life. But what they didn't know, what neither of them had ever bothered to ask about, was where their comfortable life actually came from. Tomorrow was Monday, and I had some very important phone calls to make. As I heard their laughter drifting up from downstairs, planning their future without me, I realized that perhaps it was time they learned the true cost of their cruelty. 3 days had passed since the Sunday lunch that shattered my world, and I couldn't shake the image of David's laugh echoing in my mind. I had been moving through my daily routine like a ghost, making breakfast they didn't eat, cleaning rooms they barely acknowledged, all while carrying the weight of their words in my chest. It was Wednesday afternoon when I made the discovery that would change everything. I had gone to David's home office to water the plants, something I did twice a week while they were out. Everly had gone to her yoga class, the expensive one at the boutique studio downtown, and David was supposedly at another job interview, though I was beginning to suspect these interviews were more fictional than real. His laptop was open on the desk, the screensaver displaying photos of their recent vacation to Napa Valley. A vacation I had funded without even knowing it, believing David when he said he had received a bonus from consulting work. I moved toward the desk to close the laptop when a notification popped up on the screen. A message from Everly in their shared chat group with her friends. I know I shouldn't have looked. I know it was wrong to invade their privacy, but something compelled me to click on that message, some instinct that told me I needed to see what they really thought of me when I wasn't around. What I found made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped the watering can. "Girls, you won't believe what I had to deal with this weekend," Everly had written. "The old bat is getting more clingy and pathetic by the day. She hovers around the house like some lost puppy, and honestly she smells weird now. Like old person smell mixed with desperation." My breath caught in my throat. Old person smell. Desperation. This was how my daughter-in-law described me to her friends. But she wasn't finished. "David and I are seriously considering our options. I mean, how long can one person live, right? She's 70. She's got to be getting close to her expiration date. The sooner we can get her into some facility, the better. This house is supposed to be OURS, not some geriatric daycare center." I scrolled up, my heart pounding, and found weeks of similar messages. Everly complaining about my intrusive presence, mocking the way I moved around the house, calling me the walking corpse, when she thought I couldn't hear her on the phone. And worse, much worse, were David's responses. "Give it a few more months," he had written just last week. "Mom's been talking about feeling tired lately. Maybe her health will decline naturally, and we won't have to make the hard decisions ourselves." I sat down heavily in David's desk chair, the room spinning around me. My son, my only child, was essentially hoping I would die, so he wouldn't have to deal with the inconvenience of caring for me. The boy I had worked 2 jobs to support after his father died, the teenager I had driven to every baseball practice and school event, was now discussing my mortality like a business transaction. But the messages I found next were the ones that truly broke my heart. The best part is, she has no idea how much money she actually has. Everly had written to someone named Jessica. "David handles all her finances now, and she just signs whatever he puts in front of her. When she finally kicks the bucket, we're going to be set. Like seriously set. I'm already picking out new furniture for when we can finally redecorate this place properly." David's response was a laughing emoji followed by, "She thinks she's being such a good mom, helping us out with a few hundred here and there. If she only knew she was paying for literally everything we own. A few hundred here and there." I thought about the $3,000 I transferred to their account every month, the car payments I made on David's BMW, the insurance premiums, the credit card bills I had quietly been paying to keep their credit score intact. They knew. They knew exactly where the money was coming from, and they were laughing about it. I kept reading, each message driving the knife deeper into my chest. "I can't wait until we can get power of attorney," Everly had written. "Then we won't have to keep up this charade of pretending to care about her opinions. We can just make all the decisions ourselves." Power of attorney. They were planning to take away my independence, my right to make my own choices about my life and my money. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were planning to bury me alive in some institution where I would be forgotten and ignored, while they enjoyed the fruits of my life's work. I scrolled through more messages, finding a particularly cruel exchange from just 2 days ago, the day after our Sunday lunch. "She looked so pathetic when we told her about the nursing home," David had written. I almost felt bad for a second, But then I remembered how much easier our lives will be once she's gone. Everly's response was swift. Don't feel bad, baby. She's had her time. Now it's our turn to live. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of David's office, surrounded by the diplomas I had helped pay for, the expensive furniture I had unknowingly purchased, the life I had built for a son who saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account with an expiration date. The worst part wasn't even the money, though the betrayal of that cut deep. It was the complete absence of love in their words. They didn't see me as David's mother, as a woman who had devoted her entire adult life to raising him and supporting his dreams. They saw me as an obstacle, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. I thought about all the nights I had stayed awake worrying about David's future, all the sacrifices I had made to ensure he would never have to struggle the way I had after his father died. I thought about the photo albums full of memories they wanted to erase, the traditions they were eager to abandon, the love I had poured into this family that they were so casually throwing away. As I heard their car pulling into the driveway, I quickly left the office and retreated to my room. I needed time to think, to process what I had learned, to decide what I was going to do with this devastating knowledge. That night, as I lay in bed listening to them laughing downstairs about something on television, I realized that the son I had raised and loved was gone. In his place was a stranger who was counting the days until my death would set him free. The revelation from David's laptop had left me numb for days. I moved through my routines mechanically, making breakfast they barely touched, tidying rooms they took for granted, all while their cruel words echoed in my mind. But by Friday morning something had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and persistent, but it was joined by something else. A cold, calculating anger that demanded action. I needed to know just how far their greed extended. I needed to understand if there was any shred of genuine concern for my well-being buried beneath their mercenary calculations, or if I truly meant nothing to them beyond my bank account. So I decided to test them, to create a situation that would reveal their true priorities once and for all. That morning I called Dr. Patterson's office and scheduled a routine appointment for the following week. Then I began my performance, a carefully orchestrated drama designed to expose the depth of their callousness. I haven't been sleeping well lately, I mentioned casually over breakfast, pushing my eggs around my plate with theatrical listlessness, and I've been having these strange dizzy spells. David barely looked up from his phone, but I caught Everly's eyes sharpening with interest. Not concern, I noted with a sinking heart, but the keen attention of someone sensing opportunity. Maybe you should see a doctor, Everly said, her voice dripping with false concern. At your age, you really can't be too careful about these things. At your age. As if 70 was 1 foot in the grave instead of potentially 20 more years of healthy living. I suppose you're right, I said, allowing a tremor to creep into my voice. I've been putting it off, but maybe it's time to face reality. I'm not getting any younger, and if something serious is wrong. I let the sentence hang in the air, watching their faces carefully. David finally looked up, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of genuine worry cross his features. My heart leaped with desperate hope. Maybe there was still some love left. Some piece of the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me he would always take care of me when I got old. But then Everly reached over and squeezed his hand, and whatever emotion I had glimpsed vanished behind a mask of practiced sympathy. Don't worry, Margaret, she said smoothly. Whatever happens, David and I will make sure you're taken care of. We won't let you face this alone. The words should have been comforting, but the way she said them made my skin crawl. There was something calculating in her tone, a hidden message that I was only beginning to understand. Over the weekend, I escalated my performance. I mentioned feeling confused about my finances, worried about making important decisions while my health was uncertain. I spoke vaguely about needing to get my affairs in order, and asked David if he thought I should review my will. The transformation in both of them was immediate and startling. Suddenly, they were the picture of devoted family members. Everly brought me tea without being asked and fluffed pillows behind my back. David sat beside me on the couch, something he hadn't done in months, and held my hand while asking gentle questions about my symptoms. Maybe we should come with you to the doctor, Everly suggested, her eyes bright with manufactured concern. You shouldn't have to handle this kind of news alone. And about your finances, David added, his voice carefully casual. You know I'm always here to help. If you're feeling overwhelmed, I could take a look at your accounts, make sure everything is organized. You know, just in case. Just in case. The euphemism hung between us like a loaded gun. That's so thoughtful of you both, I said, marveling at how easily the lies rolled off their tongues. I've been feeling so scattered lately. Maybe it would help if someone else could handle the practical matters while I focus on my health. I watched Everly's face light up with poorly concealed excitement. Of course, Margaret. Family takes care of family, right? You just concentrate on feeling better, and let us worry about everything else. That night, I heard them talking in hushed tones in their bedroom, the voices carrying through the thin walls of the house I was paying for. I couldn't make out specific words, but the tone was unmistakable. Excited planning, whispered calculations, the sound of two people discussing a windfall they believed was coming their way. The next morning, Everly was practically bouncing with helpful energy. She offered to drive me to my doctor's appointment, to come inside and help me remember what the doctor says, to take notes so I wouldn't have to worry about forgetting important details. You're so good to me, I told her, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I don't know what I would do without you and David. Don't even think about that, she replied, patting my arm with feigned affection. We're going to make sure you're comfortable and safe, no matter what happens. Safe. The word echoed in my mind as I watched her bustling around the kitchen, preparing a breakfast she had never bothered to make before this week. Safe in whatever facility they were already planning to dump me in. Safe from having any say in my own life once they convinced some court that I was no longer competent to make my own decisions. David joined us for breakfast, another unprecedented event. He sat across from me, studying my face with what I might have mistaken for concern if I didn't know better. Mom, he said gently, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about feeling confused. Maybe we should talk to a lawyer too, just to make sure all your paperwork is current. Power of attorney documents, that kind of thing. There it was. The trap was being set with surgical precision, and they thought I was too addled to see it coming. Power of attorney? I repeated, allowing confusion to color my voice. I'm not sure I understand. It's just a precaution. Everly jumped in smoothly. It would allow David to handle your finances and medical decisions, if you ever reach a point where you can't manage them yourself. Lots of families set these things up early, just for peace of mind. Peace of mind. Their peace of mind knowing they would have complete control over every aspect of my life and death. That sounds very responsible, I said slowly. I suppose it would be foolish not to plan ahead. I saw them exchange a quick glance, a moment of silent communication that spoke volumes about their shared agenda. They thought they had me exactly where they wanted me. Frightened, dependent, and ready to sign away my autonomy in exchange for their false promises of care. But what they didn't know was that I had learned to read people during my 70 years on this earth. And what I was reading in their faces wasn't love or concern, or even basic human decency. It was greed, pure and simple, dressed up in the language of family devotion. As I sat there, nodding and agreeing to their helpful suggestions, I was already planning my next move. They wanted to play games with my life and my money? Fine. But they were about to discover that this old woman had a few tricks they hadn't counted on. My doctor's appointment was scheduled for Tuesday morning, and I had spent the weekend perfecting my performance as a confused, frightened elderly woman who desperately needed her family's guidance. David and Everly had risen to the occasion beautifully, playing their roles as devoted caregivers with an enthusiasm that would have been touching if I didn't know their true motivations. But I needed one final test, one last confirmation of just how far they were willing to go in their pursuit of my money and my freedom. So on Monday evening, I decided to give them the opportunity to show me exactly who they really were. I waited until after dinner, when we were all settled in the living room with our evening coffee. The scene was almost domestic, almost peaceful, if you didn't know about the predators circling their prey. I'm scared, I said suddenly, my voice trembling with manufactured vulnerability. About tomorrow, about what the doctor might find. What if it's something serious? What if I'm really sick? David set down his coffee cup and moved to sit beside me on the couch, his face arranged in an expression of compassionate concern. Mom, try not to worry until we know what we're dealing with. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Together. The word should have warmed my heart. Instead, it sent a chill down my spine. But what if I can't think clearly anymore? I continued, allowing tears to gather in my eyes. What if I become one of those people who can't remember their own children's names? What if I become a burden you have to carry for years and years? I watched their faces carefully as I spoke, looking for any sign of genuine love or concern. What I saw instead was Everly's barely concealed excitement and David's careful calculation of his response. "Margaret," Everly said, reaching for my hand with practiced sympathy, "you could never be a burden. Family takes care of family, remember? No matter what happens, we'll make sure you have everything you need." "But the cost?" I pressed on, my voice breaking convincingly. "The medical bills, the special care, the medications. I've heard these things can bankrupt families. I couldn't bear the thought of ruining your futures because of my failing health." This was the moment of truth. This was when loving family members would reassure me that money didn't matter, that my life and comfort were worth more than any financial sacrifice. This was when a devoted son would tell his mother that he would spend every penny he had to ensure her well-being. Instead, David and Everly exchanged another one of their meaningful glances. "Well," David said slowly, as if the thought had just occurred to him, "you do have Dad's life insurance money and the house is paid off. Your savings should cover most medical expenses. And if something happens to you, the inheritance would help us rebuild financially. If something happens to me, not when I recovered, not when we figured out a treatment plan. If something happened to me, as in if I died." "That's true," Everly added brightly. "And honestly, Margaret, at your age, you've already lived a full life. If the diagnosis is really bad, maybe the kindest thing would be to just let nature take its course instead of fighting it with expensive treatments that might only prolong suffering." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The same clock that had belonged to my husband's family, the same clock that David had loved to wind as a child, the same clock that would apparently become Everly's property when I was no longer around to wind it myself. Let nature take its course. In other words, die quickly and quietly so they could inherit my money without the inconvenience of actually caring for me. "You really think so?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just something to consider," David said gently, patting my hand. "We want what's best for you, Mom. Sometimes that means being realistic about quality of life versus quantity." Quality versus quantity. They were discussing my death as if it were a business decision, weighing the costs and benefits of keeping me alive against the advantages of my timely demise. "And you know," Everly added with that same bright, helpful tone, "there are some really lovely hospice facilities now. Very peaceful, very dignified. Much better than trying to struggle at home where you might feel like you're imposing on everyone." Hospice. They were already planning my end-of-life care. And I hadn't even been diagnosed with anything yet. "You've both given me so much to think about," I said, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. "I'm so grateful to have family who cares enough to help me make these difficult decisions." "Of course," David replied, and I could hear the relief in his voice that I was being so reasonable about my own potential death sentence. That's what family is for. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of their conversation drifting up from the kitchen below. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was celebratory, excited, the sound of people planning a future that didn't include me. I thought about the little boy who used to climb into this same bed when he had nightmares, the teenager who brought me dandelions from the yard on Mother's Day, the young man who cried in my arms when his father died and promised he would always love me. Where had that boy gone? When had he been replaced by this stranger who saw my potential death as a financial opportunity? But even more chilling was the realization of what my test had revealed. Not only were they hoping for my death, they were actively planning to encourage it. They weren't just waiting for nature to take its course. They were prepared to help it along by convincing me to refuse treatment, to give up, to die quietly and conveniently so they could inherit my money without the messy complications of actually caring for a sick relative. The next morning, they were both uncommonly cheerful at breakfast. Everly hummed while she made coffee, and David actually offered to drive me to my appointment, something he hadn't done in years. "Are you nervous?" Everly asked as I pushed my eggs around my plate. "A little," I admitted. "But you're right about letting nature take its course. At my age, maybe it's selfish to fight too hard against whatever comes." David beamed at me as if I were a particularly bright student who had finally grasped a difficult concept. That's very wise, Mom. Very brave. Brave. As if accepting death to make their lives easier was some kind of heroic sacrifice. As we drove to the doctor's office, David chatted easily about their plans for the rest of the week, their upcoming anniversary dinner, their ideas for redecorating the guest room. Our guest room, I noticed, not my room. In their minds, I was already gone. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly suspect, was that I had one more test planned for them. And this one would reveal not just their greed, but their willingness to actively harm me to get what they wanted. The game was far from over, and I was about to show them that this old woman still had a few moves they hadn't seen coming. Dr. Patterson's appointment had gone exactly as I had planned. My blood pressure was perfect, my cholesterol levels were excellent, and my cognitive function test showed no signs of decline. I was, in his words, remarkably healthy for a woman of 70. But David and Everly didn't need to know that. Not yet. I had asked Dr. Patterson to schedule a follow-up appointment for the following week, telling him I wanted to discuss some family concerns about my future care. He had agreed readily, understanding that these conversations were often more about peace of mind than medical necessity. On the drive home, I maintained my performance as a frightened, confused elderly woman facing an uncertain future. The doctor wants to run more tests, I told David, my voice shaking convincingly. He seemed concerned about some of my symptoms. He mentioned something about neurological evaluations and possibly consulting with specialists. David's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but when I glanced at his profile, I didn't see worry. I saw anticipation. What kind of specialists? He asked, his tone carefully neutral. I'm not sure I understood everything he said, I replied, playing up my supposed confusion. Something about cognitive decline, memory issues. He used a lot of big medical words that went right over my head. By the time we arrived home, Everly was waiting at the door with barely contained excitement disguised as concern. How did it go? She asked, ushering me inside like an invalid. Not well, I said, allowing my shoulders to slump with defeat. The doctor thinks there might be something seriously wrong with my mind. He wants to do more tests, but honestly, I'm not sure I want to know the results. Over the next few days, I escalated my performance. I pretended to forget conversations we'd had earlier that morning. I left cabinet doors open and acted confused when Everly pointed it out. I misplaced my keys and spent 20 minutes searching for them, while muttering about my terrible memory. The effect on David and Everly was immediate and telling. Instead of showing concern or offering gentle reminders, they documented everything. I caught Everly taking notes on her phone, carefully recording each instance of my supposed confusion. David started speaking to me in the slow, patronizing tone people use with children or the mentally impaired. But it was what I overheard Thursday evening that finally revealed the full extent of their betrayal. I had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion, but I left my bedroom door cracked open just enough to hear their conversation in the living room below. What I heard made my blood run cold. The timing couldn't be more perfect, Everly was saying, her voice bright with excitement. If she's really developing dementia, we can get guardianship much faster than we originally planned. The lawyer said we'd need medical documentation, David replied. But if Dr. Patterson confirms cognitive decline, that should be enough to start the process. And once we have guardianship, Everly continued, we can make all the decisions about her care. We can choose the facility, manage her finances, everything. She won't have any say in it at all. My hands clenched into fists as I listened to them plan my future as if I were already dead. I've been looking at places, David said. There's a state facility about 2 hours away that's much cheaper than the private ones. The reviews aren't great, but she won't know the difference if her mind is really going. A state facility, the kind of place where elderly patients were warehoused and forgotten, where overworked staff provided minimal care to residents whose families had abandoned them. The kind of place I had nightmares about during the long, lonely evenings when I wondered what would happen to me if I ever became unable to care for myself. Perfect, Everly said. And the best part is, once she's there, we won't have to visit very often. I mean, what's the point if she won't remember anyway? They laughed then, actually laughed, at the thought of abandoning me in some neglected corner of an underfunded institution where I would spend my final years forgotten and alone. I can't believe how easy this is going to be, Everly continued. I was worried we'd have to wait years for her to die naturally, but this dementia thing is like a gift. We can have her declared incompetent, get control of her money, and stick her somewhere out of sight. It's perfect. The house alone is worth at least $400,000, David said. Plus her savings, the life insurance money she never touched, Dad's pension fund. We're looking at close to $700,000, maybe more. $700,000. They had calculated my worth down to the last penny, and they were salivating over the inheritance they believed was coming their way. I've already picked out new furniture for the master bedroom, Everly said. And I want to redo the kitchen completely. Maybe granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, one of those big islands with seating. They were redecorating my house in their minds, spending my money on improvements I would never see, planning a future built on the foundation of my suffering and abandonment. What about the car? David asked. The BMW is nice, but I've been looking at those new Tesla models. Get whatever you want, Everly replied airily. Once she's tucked away in that facility, we'll have more money than we know what to do with. I closed my bedroom door as quietly as possible and sat on the edge of my bed, my whole body trembling with rage and heartbreak. They weren't just planning to steal my money and my freedom. They were planning to erase me completely, to lock me away where I couldn't interfere with their enjoyment of the life they were building on my grave. The son I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, was prepared to condemn me to a living hell for the sake of a few $100,000. And the woman he had chosen to love was the architect of this cruel plan, the one pushing him to betray the mother who had given him everything. But what hurt most of all was the casual cruelty of their conversation, the complete absence of any guilt or regret about what they were planning to do to me. They spoke about my future suffering as if it were a minor inconvenience, something to be managed efficiently so it wouldn't interfere with their happiness. I thought about all the nights I had worked late to earn the money that had supported David through college, all the sacrifices I had made to ensure he would never have to struggle as I had. I thought about the dreams I had deferred, the trips I had never taken, the life I had never lived because I was too busy being the perfect mother to an ungrateful son. As I listened to them celebrating my impending imprisonment, I realized that the time for tests and pretense was over. They had shown me exactly who they were, and now it was time to show them who I really was. Tomorrow I would begin making some very important phone calls. And by the time I was finished, David and Everly would learn that this old woman wasn't nearly as helpless as they believed. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, and for the first time in weeks, I woke up with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with the performance I had been maintaining. While David and Everly slept late, as they always did, I quietly made my way to the kitchen and began making the most important phone calls of my life. The first call was to my bank. I need to cancel all automatic transfers from my accounts, I told the customer service representative, speaking in the crisp, clear voice of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Effective immediately. Are you sure, Mrs. Thompson? You've had these standing orders for over 5 years. I'm completely sure. I also want to change my account passwords and security questions. And I need to remove David Thompson as an authorized user on all my accounts. The second call was to the mortgage company. I'm calling about the loan for 123 Maple Street, I said. I need to inform you that I will no longer be making payments on this account. Mrs. Thompson, are you experiencing financial difficulties? We have programs that might help. No financial difficulties, I interrupted. I'm simply choosing to stop paying for a house that doesn't belong to me. The third call was to David's car dealership. I need to cancel the lease agreement for the BMW registered under David Thompson's name. I'm the guarantor on the loan, and I'm withdrawing my guarantee. By 10 o'clock I had made 12 phone calls. David's car would be repossessed within the week. The house would go into foreclosure proceedings within 30 days. Their credit cards, the utilities, the insurance policies, even their gym memberships would all be canceled because I had been the one paying the bills all along. Then I called a moving company and scheduled them to come the following Tuesday to collect my personal belongings. Finally, I called a real estate agent about a charming 2-bedroom condo I had seen advertised in a retirement community across town, a place where I could live independently, make new friends, and spend my money on myself for the first time in decades. I was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly reviewing my checklist, When David and Everly finally stumbled downstairs around 11, they were both in their bathrobes, moving with the lazy confidence of people who believed their futures were secure. "Morning, Mom," David mumbled, heading straight for the coffee maker. "How are you feeling today? Any more of those dizzy spells?" "Actually, I'm feeling clearer than I have in years," I replied truthfully. Everly settled into her usual chair and began scrolling through her phone. "Margaret, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. About the power of attorney paperwork. I think we should schedule an appointment with that lawyer this week, just to get everything sorted out before your condition gets worse." I nodded pleasantly. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear. But I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." David looked up from his coffee, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, folding my hands calmly in my lap, "I've decided I don't need a power of attorney after all. In fact, I don't need your help with anything anymore." The silence that followed was profound. Everly's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. "I don't understand," David said slowly. "It's quite simple, really. I know about your plans. I know about the nursing home you've picked out, the guardianship papers you want to file, the way you've been calculating the value of my estate, while planning my imprisonment in some underfunded facility 2 hours away." Everly's face went white. "Margaret, I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard everything," I said calmly. "And I decided to save you the trouble of having me declared incompetent. I've taken care of everything myself." David set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "What are you talking about?" "This morning, I canceled the mortgage payments on this house. I also canceled the lease on your car, David, and terminated all the utility accounts, insurance policies, and credit cards that I've been paying for. Oh, and I withdrew my financial support for your lifestyle, effective immediately." The color drained from both their faces as the implications of my words sank in. "You can't do that," Everly whispered. "Actually, I can. It's my money after all. Money that you've been spending while calling me a burden and planning to throw me away like garbage." I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt with hands that weren't shaking anymore. "I'm moving out on Tuesday. You have until then to figure out how you're going to pay for the life you've been living on my dime." "Mom, wait," David said, panic creeping into his voice. "You're confused. You're not thinking clearly. Remember what the doctor said about your memory problems." I smiled then, a real smile for the first time in weeks. "Oh, David, there's nothing wrong with my memory. There never was. I just wanted to see how far you were willing to go in your betrayal of the woman who raised you and sacrificed everything for your happiness." "This is insane," Everly spat, her mask of false sweetness finally falling away completely. "You're a spiteful, vindictive old woman. David, tell her she can't do this to us." But David wasn't looking at his wife. He was staring at me with something that might have been recognition, the dawning understanding that he had underestimated the woman who had outmaneuvered corporate executives and balanced budgets long before he was born. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About your financial dependence on me? I've always known. About your plan to have me declared incompetent and locked away? Since Wednesday evening, when you and your wife discussed it so thoroughly downstairs." I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up an envelope I had prepared earlier. "This contains the contact information for my new address, which I will share with you once you've proven that you can support yourselves without my money. It also contains the phone number for a counselor who specializes in family relationships, in case you ever decide you'd like to learn how to be a real son instead of a parasite." I headed toward the stairs, then paused and turned back to face them one final time. For 38 years, I believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing myself for your happiness, David. I thought that love meant giving until there was nothing left of myself to give. But you've taught me something valuable. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's cruelty. 3 months later, I was sitting on the small balcony of my new condo, sipping tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. My new life was quieter than my old one, but it was mine in a way that nothing had been mine for decades. I had joined a book club, started taking watercolor classes, and even begun dating a widower named Harold, who treated me like someone whose thoughts and opinions mattered. For the first time in years, I was spending my money on things that brought me joy instead of funding the lifestyle of people who despised me. David had called twice since I moved out. Both conversations were brief and focused entirely on his financial difficulties and his hope that I would come to my senses and resume supporting him. I listened politely and then hung up. Everly had left him 6 weeks after I cut off their funding, taking half of what little they had left and moving back in with her parents. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but I felt no guilt either. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. As for me, I was finally learning what it meant to live for myself instead of for people who saw my love as weakness and my generosity as obligation. The phone rang as I was getting ready for bed, and I saw David's number on the caller ID. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me hoped that maybe finally he was calling to apologize, to acknowledge what he had done, to ask if there was any way to repair the damage he had caused. "Hello, David," I said. "Mom, I need help. The house is being foreclosed on next week, and I don't have anywhere to go." I closed my eyes and felt the last of my foolish hope die quietly in my chest. "That sounds like a problem you'll need to solve yourself," I said gently. "Good night, David." I hung up the phone and turned off the ringer. Tomorrow was Saturday, and Harold was taking me to the farmer's market and then to lunch at that little cafe by the lake. We were going to talk about books and travel and all the things I wanted to do with whatever years I had left. I had finally learned the difference between being loved and being used. And for the first time in